Hello, everybody, and welcome to this, the Large Blast podcast, the podcast that drops Warhammer knowledge from on high onto you, the listener. I'm your host, Stoney, and I'm joined, as always, by my hosts, Welshie.
Slanesh!
And my host, Matt.
For the Emperor.
And we're going to talk about all things Warhammer and Warhammer related. And we like to get things off with a totally original idea we call Hobby Progress. We thought of it first. All other podcasts have stolen it from us. So, Matt, what have you done Hobby Progress-wise?
Really not a great deal. Just trying to fit in where I can, trying to get this 28 mag done, which is basically all I've done since a week or 2 weeks. Yeah,
it's a big project. Well, can you give us any clues as to what you're making, or do you want to save it as a surprise?
I think I have. I think I have mentioned it previously. I've definitely spoken to Welshie about it. It's the deletion teams, the historical deletion teams that go around the library on Terra and wipe out rooms of information. And
the Tipex crew. Exactly,
but with a flamer. So there's fire and brimstone, and it's nearly done. I'm kind of fed up with it now. I just want to get it done because I've got loads of other stuff that I want to do.
Yeah, oh God, I know that feeling.
Yeah, I haven't really spent much time on it really, but I want to get it done, and that's what I'll be doing probably for the next 2 weeks.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm going to piggyback off the back of that because my main thing is just wanting to get stuff done as well. So I'm also going to get on that. I've been doing for ages. I haven't really talked about it that much because it's quite boring, but doing another copy sculpt of this Ghast model thing, the Keldrek Lord of Shrouds, Knight of Shrouds he's called. I've just been copying that to try to up my sculpting skills again, and I've got to this bit and it is the most annoying thing I've ever sculpted in my entire fucking life. He's got around his neck this hourglass, right? And it's the most annoying thing because it's so fucking thin in the fucking middle of it that every time you touch it or press on it or do anything, the fucking thing crumbles like a goddamn wet cake. And I'm sick of the fucking thing, Matt. I want to do something more fun, but now I'm in too deep. I just dream about the fucking hourglass, and I can't put it down until the hourglass is done. Anyway, so Welshie, what have you been up to?
Oh, well, I'm going to make both of you green with envy because I have finished my 28 mag model. So I've finished that up, and I've moved on to pastures new. I've got some Noise Marines done I've been working on for a while, and I've started kit bashing together a mixture of the Lord Discordant model and the Hell Pit Abomination Skaven model for a big kind of chaosy rat demon engine.
Nice. That is, you see, I think I mentioned this to you earlier as well, but that's the kind of size stuff that I want to be making now. I want to do something. I want to get out of this. I want to make a big fucking car, a goddamn castle or something.
Make that damn Gene Stealer limo, Stone.
Yeah,
treat
it's
yourself.
time. It's time. All right, let's move on to the news. It's the news. Wow. It's the chuffing news.
Have you heard? 6s are now 4s.
It's the news.
Gene Stealer limo's back.
News.
First bit of news then, boys and girls. We're going to the natural world with David Attenborough. Did you see that someone found a spider in Australia and they are a Warhammer fan?
Oh, yes,
and this
I did see that.
It's called Abaddon Despoiliator.
Oh, cool. That's really cool. I know that there's a huntsman spider that's named after David Bowie. So
really?
I think that these spider guys, you know, they're like cool guys who like to name stuff after Warhammer and Bowie and shit.
Big news for us to discuss then, boys. More animation announced, and this is the move from GW to basically employ every fan animation maker out there that we've watched and loved and talked about. Really cool.
So this is the series of animated stuff that's been getting a lot more prevalent recently, it seems, and there's been some excellent fan-made stuff, and it sounds like Games Workshop have just decided to fucking hire those guys straight on board and make some more of this stuff.
Yeah, Astartes, which we've raved about in the past, and if you're listening to this and you haven't gone on YouTube and watched Astartes Part 1 to 5, what are you doing with your life?
I didn't think they'd hired him. I thought they'd bought him out, and now he's going to make a second season.
Yeah,
Like, they're going to fund him.
Fired, bought out. I mean, they gave him.
What's the difference?
They gave him a bunch of money he didn't have before. You know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't checked to see if the original 5 episodes have gone offline. Has anyone checked?
No.
Because the tower one, that's all completely gone. So it was online. It was online for ages, and then Games Workshop have come in and essentially bought it out, and now it's gone offline. So it won't be on YouTube anymore. It will only be on Warhammer. So it could be. You could see it in 2 ways, couldn't you? You can also see it as Games Workshop trying to regain control of their IP.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also it's one of those things, isn't it? Double-edged sword, where this guy, I don't know if he made this in his spare time or whatever, but with the backing of Games Workshop, who knows what else he could accomplish. So hopefully it was a beneficial thing that will lead to some cooler stuff in the future rather than just getting it off the internet. Cool. So I understand that there's been some hench lore drops that are coming out, Welshie, that you've been very excited to tell everyone about. What have you discovered?
Yeah, very, very deep, I think, wide-ranging lore reveals in the recent book by Dan Abnett, Penitent, which is the latest in the Beckwin trilogy, number 2 in the Beckwin trilogy, which follows on from the Eisenhorn and Ravenor trilogy.
Hello, listener at home, Stoney here. We're going to be dropping some quite serious spoilers for the Beckwin book in this next part of the show. So to help you avoid any of that, if you don't want to hear it, I'm going to be playing this rather fetching elevator music underneath our conversation. Goes on for about 5 minutes. Skip through. If you hear this music, you know to skip ahead. Stoney out.
In this book, Beckwin, who was one of Ravenor and Eisenhorn's retinue for a while, she got killed earlier on in the series. And this book is basically based on a clone of her. And she is a psychic blank. She's a null maiden, which we talked about a few episodes ago in our psychic special. And this book kind of starts with her, this cloned null lord, in school. And she's in a school full of other psychic nulls, and they're basically spies. But Ravenor and Eisenhorn don't really seem to know she exists. And the book is basically them fighting over getting her into their retinue, because Ravenor and Eisenhorn have fallen out. The long and short of this is there is a hidden underground city that can only be accessed by going through mirrors, and something big is there. So this whole book hints that it's going to be one of the missing Primarchs underground. The whole book, she goes and sees this numerology guy, and she got this code, and he goes off, and he's this really kind of crazy savant, and he puts all these numbers together, and he goes, it's definitely a Primarch, and they crack the code, and the code is that this guy is called the King in Yellow.
No.
So there's this guy called the King in Yellow, and they keep referring to the King in Yellow for the whole book. And it reaches a crescendo and it goes up, and you're sitting there thinking, who is the king? Yeah, what the hell's going on here? Is it really going to be a new Primarch? And she goes through the mirror towards the end, and there's this whole world behind the mirror that has flying Space Marine sized things with black wings flying through the sky. Half of the population are psychic nulls, who are all clones of 4 psychic nulls. It's like cloned nulls, and the other half of the population are custodes. It's not slap to the face a Primarch. It's Constantine Valdor growing an army of custodes and nulls and strange Space Marine creatures for Christ knows what.
Valdor, so Valdor returns.
Valdor returns.
Yeah, that's quite cool. That is quite cool.
Well, you know, I mean, obviously, we all know who Valdor is, right? Yeah, but for the people at home, can you tell them, you know, just in case there's one of us or the people at home don't know who Valdor is, can you refresh our memory a little bit?
I certainly can. So Valdor was, during the Horus Heresy, the head of the Custodes. He was the Emperor's, if Malcador was the Emperor's right-hand man, that Constantine Valdor was the Emperor's left-hand man. Leader of the Custodes, fought with the Emperor during your unification wars. Him and the Emperor go way back. He is your hard line the Emperor is a scientist, Imperial truth, none of this religion bullshit.
Right.
Badass, like Primarch level fighter. He would go toe to toe with a Primarch in a fight.
And he disappeared.
And then he
didn't
just kind of disappears at the end of the Heresy.
He went underground.
Went literally underground.
And there's a Games Workshop model of him, isn't there? It's not Forge World, it's a Games Workshop.
I
model.
think so. The
I
current
think we
guy in
talked
charge
about
of the Custodes is called Valoris, I think. Somebody Valoris. Even at the end, you're not entirely sure. Like, he doesn't say anything in the book. It's still kind of up in the air. Is it really going to be him? So whenever the next book comes out, I'm sure we'll find out.
Oh, mate, maybe it was just some dweeb in his basement making a cosplay, and that was it. Oh, they're underground. Like, it's just some guy making an excellent Valdor cosplay out of a load of foam.
Yeah.
So, model spotlight. In this part of the show, we shine a spotlight directly onto a cool model, what has come out recently. And this time, we've got a big bad boy, a redo of an oldie, which is Balak, or Belacor, or one of those. Balak? I think it's Balak. Belacor. The Demon Prince guy that had a model for Fantasy and 40k has been redone, and fuck me, this is a beast of a redo.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. I think this
Love
is
those hooks.
The best model that Games Workshop. I feel like I've said this about 50 times in the past year, but I have loved all of the Necrons. It made me build a Necron army, and then they released this. I like it more than any of the Primarchs. I like it more than anything they've released recently, and that's saying something.
It is fantastic.
Fantastic.
I mean, the old model of this was a really cool model. It was sort of a bizarre size. It was not quite as big as like a standard Demon Prince, somewhere kind of just in between a Demon Prince and sort of a Terminator Lord, really. So this is a massive upgrade, because I think he's like 300 points on the battlefield. So it's nice to have a model that reflects how fucking beastie he was, it is still. It's a cool kit as well, because it switches between Age of Sigmar and the 40k kit. They've done some nice little add-ons for it, like the base. There's obviously a difference in the base, like you can get a dead Space Marine for it, or there's like a dead Age of Sigmar guy on the other base, and they've got some little tweaks. Don't know if you can see on his wings, but he's got like a Space Marine helmet and like a one of those sort of reefs, those gold reef things that the Ultramarines wear. So, you know, it's got like, it's cool that it's got this variety in the kit, and it's not just one model that you switch over like they used to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, the size, you're right, Stody. I was looking at Demon Princes on eBay today, and he was just an alternate build of the Demon Prince box, right? Whereas now
no, he was his own model.
Okay.
He was fine cast as well, which always put people off him, I think. I've still got the head of that model because I bought the kit for something else. I can't remember, and I used a piece of it. And then ever since then, I kept the head because I was just like, oh man, this head is fucking awesome. I've got to find something for it to go on. And it's just the wrong size for everything. You know, it's just like, it's just too big for small stuff and too small for big stuff. But like, yeah, it's really cool head, and it's got that cool horn design, which they've brought over fucking really well in this new build. Yeah, I recognized him instantly when I saw the model.
I love the Space Marine turning into dust at the base, like fading into oblivion.
Fireworms.
Right. Yeah.
When I showed this model to my girlfriend, she described him as the king of piercings. Is that the king of piercing?
Yeah, sure.
And that sword as well is. I want to know how long it is because it looks huge. If the mod, like, it's at least twice the length of a Primaris Space Marine, that sword.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
yeah, it's massive. So, it is. It's very cool. I can imagine that every kind of edgelord that goes on Second Life, this is the avatar that they're trying to make. Basically, it's fucking. It's really cool. It's so stereotypically demon as well. And what's cool about it is it's like it is. He's always supposed to be Chaos Undivided, and it is that it really captures that. It's not leaning too far in any Chaos direction. It's just big and kind of classic Chaos. So yeah, he looks fucking badass. If you play Chaos, there's no doubt that you're going to want to pick this up. I'm sure there's lots of people going to want this.
And now, all the way from the LBP Studios in sunny Brighton, the Large Blast podcast is proud to present a fireside chat with Black Library author and Warhammer legend, Mr. Gav Thorpe.
So I read Shakespeare and it was rubbish. I read Tolstoy and it made me sick. And then I went out and I got myself an audiobook, a Space Hulk, and I was born again. That's right. We're here talking to Gav Thorpe. Can you believe it? Large Blast podcast first. How you doing, Gav?
I'm doing good, thank you. Yes. Yeah. How are you guys?
Yeah, we're very well, thanks.
Surviving.
Thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here.
Good. Well, great. Well, yeah, we've got a series of questions, as I'm sure you're aware. But we thought that we'd kick things off just with a little bit of kind of a quick fire round, if you will, where we just kind of blast a few questions at you and try to get your kind of honest, quick response. Hopefully trying to get you to spill some secrets about the Black Library or something along those lines. So Welshie, do you want to take it away?
Okay, yeah, quick one-word answers. So, Amasek or Miod?
Miod. Yeah.
Ignoring the Eldar, what's your favourite 40k faction?
Blood Angels.
Did Magnus do anything wrong?
Magnus did loads wrong.
Would you join the Tau Empire?
Not anymore.
Ooh.
Least favourite
That's a loaded
Primarch?
answer.
Least favourite.
Least favourite, yeah.
So my least favourite Primarch. Oh, that's harsh. Least favourite Primarch. I don't know, because it's like, well, okay, we'll work with or which one? Ferrus Manus. Don't lose your head.
Favourite 40k model?
Favourite 40k model. Ooh. That's a really tricky one because there's just so many cool ones. But our favourite 40k model, I'm going to have to go with. I can't choose favourites.
Top two.
Actually, no,
Top
I will.
three.
The Armiger, the Knight Armigers.
Oh, the little knight. Yeah.
I love them. They're cool.
Ah,
I haven't got any yet. I want to get some of those. So it's my favourite because I don't have any.
That's always the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a big one. Is the Emperor a god? Yes or no?
Yeah.
No.
Ooh.
No.
Best
If you can force
bit.
me yes or no. No. Yep.
Best bit of a Sunday roast.
Tatties. Roast tatties.
Yeah.
As long as they're crispy.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there Chaos Eldar hiding anywhere?
Yes.
Strong.
Some in plain sight, but we can get onto that.
Ooh.
Okay. Last question. What would be your ultimate Warhammer cosplay?
It's free to wear or to see someone doing.
For you to wear. For you to
Free
wear.
to wear. Well, I don't know. I'm going very Space Wolfy at the moment, but I will. Do you know what? I'd go for. I think I could do quite a good Redemptor Kirinov.
Yes.
Crazy ecclesiarchy priest. I could do that. I think at the moment.
I wondered, Gav. I always found. I know you've worked on the City Fight books for 40k. I always found them really inspiring.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And I sometimes feel like some of the magic is lost now. There's lots of pre-made terrain. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree in a sense. I think, and the same with conversions and stuff. I mean, I understand commercially why Games Workshop focuses on its own products.
Yeah.
And there's and again, actually, over the last few months, year maybe, I don't know. Again, White Dwarf and Warhammer Community and stuff is actually embracing, certainly on the models side, more of the modelling thing and conversions and kind of kit bashing and stuff like that. Certainly. But yeah, the terrain thing, I think there is still a slight disconnect, I would say, between that kind of making your own hills and getting a bit of foam board and making some buildings or whatever and having the kits. And having the kits is cool because, of course, it's all there. But actually, I think that's quite a steep step actually to getting terrain on your table. So although it's very convenient, actually there is a price factor. And that, I mean, historically GW has always had this kind of there's always been a tension, obviously, between the pricing of terrain and of miniatures. And fundamentally, if you walk into a Games Workshop store and you've got £10 or whatever in your hand, and there's a tank on that side for £10, £20, whatever, and a hill or a building, it's like, well, I'm going to spend my money on the tank. And so being able to sourcing ways in which they can manufacture terrain in a way that makes it actually affordable and desirable compared to buying miniatures instead. I think they've moved towards that. I think, and the kits are lovely and they're crazy, and that I remember conversations with John Blanche about terrain and Dave Andrews, and trying not to make stuff generic. Although there is the Imperial Gothic is very ubiquitous, I suppose you'd say, especially since like the city fight terrain and things like that. And trying to make sure that that everything they release actually does feel like it's got that 40k feel to it. You couldn't put it anywhere else unless it's got a similar aesthetic. I think. But a hill made out of polystyrene with flock on is just still a hill with it's like and I think that part of it has gone. I think that terrain modelling, and I think there's ways of bringing it back. I think you could do, which still incorporates the kits and stuff like that, but actually about making dioramas, that kind of stuff. You don't. Not everyone's going to have a Realm of Battle board with Citadel terrain on it, paint it. So I think there's a way of marrying that hobby side of it to product still.
I was thinking it might be quite good if they just did a box set that was just kind of windows and stuff, so you could stick those on a box or something like that. So you had the little twiddly bits that you couldn't do yourself.
That's what Forge World did, I think. And again, because of course Forge World is slightly more veteran based and stuff, so actually more prepared to do modelling and things, and that's where you're more likely to see this stuff. But I think they did like Hobbit hole stuff that you could get so not for 40k or Age of Sigmar, but actually that principle of stuff of like little hobbit doors and windows and windowsills and all this kind of stuff that you could then put onto polystyrene hill. I remember seeing that, I think, at Warhammer Fest, the last one that I went to, so that was 2 years ago. I think that's a thing.
Good idea.
And there are companies that do that kind of stuff that offer kind of architectural features, isn't it, that you could then use to bling up. Like just foam board or
bog roll or something like
plastic
that.
card. Exactly.
Classic.
Well, that's it. Well, the Pringles tube, vat or tank.
So that kind of stuff. Plastic wine glasses.
Absolutely.
Well, we used to get a joss stick and put it inside the Pringles can, so it looked like it was smoking, like a smoking tower. Like an incense stick in there.
That's cool. Cheap dry ice.
Exactly. All right, cool. Well, shall we talk a bit about the boxed games and things like that then?
Yeah.
Should we move on to that? Because we know that you've been involved with a lot of kind of rules designs and things like that. And one of the things that we've been quite interested on the show is this idea of kind of making lore a kind of something that happens on the battlefield. If you know what I mean. So kind of a rule that sort of reflects lore and things like that. And we sort of wondered how you kind of go about a process like that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting subject, because for me, that's always kind of been the point of the background of 40k, Warhammer, whatever, which is we take it to a certain point, which is we give you the history, the backdrop, some examples of battles and things like that. But then you take over your miniatures armies, your story finishes it off. It's not for like the studio to dictate everything. It's a case of setting everything up, and then your games. You get to then play out what happens next. You get to create, either use the characters from the background or create your own. But there is a tension between making stuff cool in the background and then making it kind of balanced and fun on the tabletop, and how much of that correlation there is. So, the classic one being like the Space Marine is like, well, just how strong is a Space Marine? How hard should a Space Marine be? Because in the background, it's exciting, and especially when you're writing novels and stuff, it's like, well, Space Marines have fight at the power of narrative. It's like either 1 or 5 or 10, depending on how many need to kill them, or for what's good for a story. But of course, actually, firstly, people want to collect armies of miniatures. So actually making Space Marines too powerful basically means that, it's like, even if you said, oh yeah, cool, you can have 10 Space Marines in an army and that's equivalent to 2,000 points or whatever power level you're playing at, that's actually not as much fun. Because people like to have a lot of variety of units and have stuff to collect, because that's part of the hobby. So even if you deliberately, you're not necessarily ramping down the power just for balance or for some notion of balance or competitiveness. You're also doing it so people can actually have fun collecting the miniatures, painting miniatures, and participate in that sort of way. Yeah. And then also, I really flip flop on this in terms of how specific traits and things get translated from the background into the rules, and the one that always gets me, of course, and I understand both sides of it, which is why I can never decide, which is about Space Marine color schemes and chapter traits and that idea. So fundamentally, it comes down to, it's like if we've got Ultramarines or Blood Angels, and obviously these have got much more specific troop types than they used to have when I was working on them. But if you painted them blue, they had one set of rules. And if you painted them red, they had a different set of rules. But of course, actually, you can make up what you want. So you could paint them red and have the blue guys sets of rules.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you start getting into that and very stratified, very specific aesthetic choices influencing game choices, it gets tricky, and there is no right answer. There isn't a well, actually, because and I think especially for gamers, there's a natural inclination that if something's mentioned in the background or as a characteristic of stuff, it should be reflected in the tabletop. Like you say, it feels right that white scars fight like white scars. But actually, what does that mean? Does that mean that you have special white scars rules for every single model, or is that actually you use the Space Marine list and you collect only white scars type stuff? And I think that's, and this is where I come down to, there's a tension between, and so actually there's a third element between background and rules, which is what I would call the hobby, which is actually, and it's not just for games like World War II or any other kind of historical gaming or whatever. It's like, or should my fourth hussars of this be reflected in the fact that at this particular battle they had bayonets and therefore they should have a special rule, or is it just a case of like, well, no, the system's kind of distance enough. But the thing is, most gamers like rules, and actually, and there is a degree of literalism in gaming of like, well, these guys have chainswords, so therefore they have a chainswords rule, and actually these guys are really good with chainsaws, so they need chainsaw +1 rule.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But how far do you take it is just personal preference.
Especially the aesthetic thing, like if someone turns up with a bright yellow Space Marine army and says they're playing Raven Guard sneaky rules, you kind of take a step back and think, it just doesn't merge,
No, I mean, the one that kind of got me, and I understand exactly why he did it at the time, but I remember when Jervis Johnson wrote the 3rd edition Chaos Codex, the one we did the tiny skinny codexes, and there were upgrades in there, and one of the upgrades for Chaos was +1 attack for spiky bits, which is kind of funny, but it's like, so you're essentially intimating there's Chaos models without spiky bits that have 1 less attack, and then suddenly, and it kind of made clear this mechanistic link between an aesthetic and a rule, and that one I think wasn't necessarily such a good example. But then on the other hand, we did exactly the same with Terminator runners for Space Marines, so you or an Iron Halo, adding physical attributes, because it's a miniatures game, and that's the important thing, it's a miniatures game, so adding identifiable physical attributes to special rules is cool, actually, in some ways, because you can go, I'm going to model an Iron Halo on my captain, because he has an Iron Halo. My captain has a Terminator runner, therefore he has an extra attack, because we know he's a veteran captain. Well, there isn't any veteran captains, but, all captains are veterans. Which is like, then begs the question, it's not having the thing, the absence of the thing then becomes a bit weird. And also, it's like, well, I want my captain to have, again, suddenly people don't actually bother with the aesthetics, and that's where you get into trouble, because you go, I want to have, I can actually just give them +1 attack. Do I need to model on a Terminator honor? In which we don't specify what a Terminator honor is. So, obviously, there's less of that now, because as we were sort of like just mentioning beforehand, the rules these days are much more fixed on very specific models. So actually, a Terminator captain with Terminator honors, captain, Primarchs captain. Well, these are all very individual entries now, fairly set. They might have some options, but they're actually fairly set in what they do.
Yeah.
But that just means that the decision has been made by the developer, not by you. They've looked at the model and go, oh, he's got a Terminator Crux Terminatus on his shoulder pad. He's, it's like, does he get it? It might not be as mechanistic now as he gets +1 attack, but it's like, well, does that mean something? Does that mean he's better than a captain without a Crux Terminatus on his shoulder pad, or hanging from his bolt gun, or whatever?
Does it sometimes work the other way, where you have a rule, like kind of technically that's working in the game, and you're like, right, we need to kind of make some law to make this rule work in reverse, if you see what I mean?
I've never done it that way, no, because I think my very kind of like arty kind of approach to this thing is that there's that I consider the 40K background and lore as a thing that exists, and there's a truth there, not like a spiritual truth or anything like that, but there are certain facts and a theme and an aesthetic stuff that exists outside of any particular written word, miniature or model or rules or whatever. And then actually just as there is in the real world and history and things, and then what we're trying to do is embody those things in the written background, in the rules, in the illustrations, that kind of thing. So actually, those things are always trying to reflect something that kind of is a truth about 40K. So for me, I wouldn't write a rule.
So they're kind of
doesn't reflect. I wouldn't like say, it'd be really convenient.
Yeah,
it's like it'd be really convenient if these guys had an extra attack because that'd make them better. But actually, you go, but they, it's like their rules aren't. It's like, oh, the Tau would be better if they were better in close combat. You go, well, tough. They're not. So right, the army you design the army way, and deliberately, people have weaknesses and strengths in the army design and all that kind of thing. And as much as a designer, it'd be like, but wouldn't it be cool, or wouldn't it be useful if you go no? Because wouldn't it be cool?
They've got less gravity. They can't be stronger.
No, exactly. Or but also it just doesn't fit that truth. Of like, and it's like, oh yeah, but so that's a very particular example. But going back to that, blood angels. Well, there's certain truths about the blood angels that we represent, and obviously, again, long time ago now, but it used to be that the blood angels essentially were a codex chapter, but with a particular flaw that gave them death company, and that was their thing. They were, there was a reason why the blood angels and the dark angels could both be fit in one codex, because essentially they were a codex chapter, and they either had their Deathwing and Ravenwing, and or they had Death Company. But that was it. These are the red guys, these are the dark green guys, these are the blue guys, and here's a little bit of variation. And then very deliberately, and then here's the Space Wolves, who are the wacky guys. And they get and actually, although they have actually still got basically Devastators and tactical squads, actually, but they're not. They've got Long Fangs and Grey Hunters, and they've got their own. They've got their own twist on things, because their entire character was they are the unorthodox chapter. But of course, so much more has been developed in terms of rules since then. It's like we had Black Templars and Salamanders, and we want to have White Scars and stuff, and then suddenly, so everyone becomes unorthodox, as opposed to, and then everything's different. And I think that's dangerous in a way, because you go to the core of it should still be. And the same for Craft Worlds and Orc clans. I'm using Space Marines just because they're a very easy example, and they were very deliberately, the big four, as they used to be, were very deliberately designed and chosen in a particular way to represent different aspects of Space Marine and Space Marine culture and armies and stuff like that. But the same is true of, whether it's Samhan jet bikes, or, it's like, well, if you want to collect an army from that craft world, then you've got the hobby choice of just collecting. Hopefully you can design a flexible army, and I think that's where we've gone wrong as well. And kind of put my hand up, a big part of the team when we did this, was we got very prescriptive on what people could put in their armies for a while, because we wanted to shape it. And it's like, we can have 2 troops, and you can have these, and it was nice, and it felt kind of military organization, kind of like and stuff like that. But actually, what it also did was meant that there was a lot of the flexibility went from the old style army list, which was like, well, you can spend up to 50% of your points on this. It's like, and so hobby-wise, you could say, I just want an army of jet bikes. And suddenly we ended up having to jump through hoops of like making exceptions or variant army lists and things like that. So, whereas fundamentally, actually, you want to, ideally, Gav's design ethic, not necessarily what the design ethic of the studio is these days, design an army list that's broad and flexible and within a certain degree of balance works enough for people to be able to make hobby decisions about what that represents. And then if you want to, you have a character or a particular troop type, but you don't have to make everything, you don't have to make every single model have a White Scars rule. You can have a special elite White Scar squad of bikers, for instance, who do have a special rule. Like the Ravenwing used to be, it's like Ravenwing were elite bikers, they were special. But then, as more and more background gets layered on, and more people want cool stuff, traitor legions or particular craftwells and tyrannid swarms, and the same as in Age of Sigmar. There's different cities and all this stuff, and people want gamers want more than just to be a color scheme. They want it to be meaningful in the game. I suppose it's just the level of what counts as meaningful varies a lot from person to person and designer to designer.
I wondered, we've spoken a lot about the 40K in terms of the tabletop game, but there's a very popular botched game, Battlefleet Gothic, that has the increasing hubbub online about a return. But I wondered if you were to write a new set of rules for Battlefleet Gothic, what would you change from the original? And if I could ask, would it still have blast markers in, or are they old-fashioned?
Well, that'd be kind of harsh for me to redesign Andy Chambers' game, because I'm working with him on some games for Warlord, and he would like to redesign bits of it. I could tell you that. He's not.
Really?
I mean, I think it's great. It's one of my favourite games, but he doesn't like the firepower tables anymore. His design philosophy's moved on since then. Well, it's like, but I wouldn't change much about it. I love Battlefleet Gothic, and it's a 6. But Gothic's one of those interesting ones again, though. It's very hard to expand it beyond the parameters that are there, because there's not many levers to pull. So it works really well with what it does. But even once we got to the Eldar and the Orcs, it's tricky. And then once you get Necrons and Tau and trying to build some of that variation in you're talking about for a game that essentially is Napoleonic Age of Sail / island hopping Pacific carrier combat in space. That's fine. That works with those two basic Chaos Fleet, Gothic fleet, Imperial fleets. But then it's like the archetypes for the other ones really start to break the system and again the aesthetic and the feel of the game a bit. So, and you end up having to get a bit more out there. So you end up with inertialist drive Necrons and doing stuff, and running rings around. And suddenly you go, well, actually the core of the game isn't what it used to be, because it's had to have all this other stuff. And so I think that's the thing you'd have to look at, is there a way of redesigning those core mechanics? Not changing them massively, but that actually these other bits that as it expands beyond that Imperial versus Chaos and even Orcs and stuff, it doesn't break the system, because I think those things have to break the system to be different enough.
You said levers. What do you mean, like in game mechanic terms? What do you mean by lever?
So levers that you can pause phase. So it's a thing that you can manipulate by to create a characteristic, I suppose. So stats are an obvious lever. You add a point. Right. That point is is a lever. But actually, a card deck. As soon as you add a card deck to a game, then you've got all sorts of stuff about reshuffling the deck, drawing deck to hand. There's all kinds of things you can do to give something a special rule or make it different. Either for general gameplay or to represent specific abilities or troop types or whatever. And I think the firepower table and the basics of Battlefleet Gothic have too few mechanics to manipulate in a way,
right?
Because it's very deliberately restrictive, I suppose. And the idea of, like say, blast markers and the way terrain works and stuff like that is that idea of these massive battleships and cruisers, slamming broadsides into each other and all that kind of stuff, and works really well for that and the imagery of it. But as soon as you get something that doesn't do that, like the Eldar or the Necrons or the Tau, suddenly, so it's like, okay, what other things would that basic system, how? And I don't know if you could. I think it's one of those where maybe actually you have to make the decision. This game isn't about those things; it's about this aesthetic, like Necromunda or Mordheim or whatever. Those again, Necromunda, as much as like there's enforcers and there were spirers and all kinds of other stuff. Actually, never had. It wasn't about how do I put like Gazgul Thraka in Necromunda, because it'll just break the system.
I was wondering what you're saying earlier about how good is a Space Marine. You obviously worked on Inquisitor, which we all love, and that's got everything from a man with a gun. I know, Stoney, you were really interested in asking some stuff about how that mechanic worked out.
Well, definitely. I mean, I think there's Inquisitor is such an interesting case of, especially when we're talking about games that lean so heavily on the lore and are lore driven as well, because it's so role play-esque and everything. I mean, what was how did it sort of come about? Like, what was your sort of plans for it?
So Inquisitor was the short version was Games Workshop's release strategy was there would be like a big box game every Christmas, or whatever, basically every September, in time for Christmas, which was like would either be a redo of 40K, a redo of Warhammer, or equivalent big kind of release like that. But there's also an Easter release every year, which was what was called the secondary games, which was stuff like Epic, Battlefleet, Gothic, Man of War, depending on how far I want, so those kinds of games. And so there was a slot for the Easter 2000 for AN game. I think maybe I can't remember if Mordheim I think Mordheim might have come out the Easter before, or 99 or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but basically it was a 40K slot, not a Warhammer slot. So we came out with a whole bunch of stuff, proposals for games that could go in this slot. Mad ideas, some of it, and just putting it out there. But one of the ideas that we came up with, and it was sort of Jervis that came up with the initial idea, which, funnily enough, hooks right into his latest White Dwarf column in the new White Dwarf, which was about 54mm Wild West skirmish games. Yeah, so large 54mm scale miniatures, and a much more narrative style of game, quite detailed rules for almost like one-on-one combat and things like that. So, and that was it really. That was the proposal really, was just a 54mm skirmish game. Mm-hmm. Which the powers that be, so that basically was Rick Priestley, Alan Merritt, and John Blanche, were the ones we kind of looking over these proposals and thinking about them in terms of product and imagery and all the rest of it. And they really liked that because they obviously had similar background in playing with 54mm models, and the idea of because that was the other thing, is like the Easter games were usually different scale. So Christmas game. 28mm. Christmas game was 28mm, where you get Epic, Man of War, Battlefleet, Gothic, whatever was the Easter game. Because the proper wisdom and proven by sales was that anything that wasn't 28mm doesn't sell as well miniatures wise. People like that scale for a reason, and so it wouldn't be able to carry a Christmas slot. But actually, these big, very characterful, miniatures, 54mm miniatures, because again, miniatures comes first for Games Workshop, which again, I usually have to kind of explain. It's not that the games aren't important, but there's no point, as we said, there's no point inventing a rule or a piece of background or something that isn't going to make a cool miniature, or isn't, it's like, aha, I've invented this floating invisible blob race. Great. Yeah. Well, we're not making any models of those, are we?
That's why we'll never see the enslavers then, is that what you're saying?
Oh, no, because they're not invisible. Floating blobs is fine. Invisible floating.
Okay,
fine.
No,
absolutely. Blobs is cool. But invisible, or, like, this one is just actually a collection of pyrotechnic colours. And you're like, the heavy metal team going, what?
Those models are amazing. Those Inquisitor models like Cherubale and Tyrus, and
there's some classics in there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those where it was a bit like physical sensibilities required. So it's like we had a range of about the equivalent resource to make 15 54mm models, which would be about the amount of resource that would go into that kind of game in terms of how they worked out how much longer they take to sculpt and all the rest of it and stuff, which isn't a large range, isn't very flexible to divide it up into goodies and baddies. And so the background for it evolved actually, because originally, and I used this a little bit, I think when I reused kind of some of these ideas when I wrote a supplement called The Thorians, which is very much about the foundation of the Inquisition. And the original ideas we had, actually, it was going to be between Inquisitors and Chaos Magi. That was kind of like the fight. So you'd have an Inquisitor on one side, or a Chaos Magi, and obviously the Chaos Magi could fight each other. But actually, it's like, we need to go more than this, because we still, if we divide it into half, 7 models isn't a lot to choose from. So this is why Rick sort of proposed the idea of the kind of radicals and Puritans, and this idea of this actual internecine fight with the Inquisition. So we didn't have to have Chaos Major, we didn't have to have Chaos anything. It was just everybody could take any, and you'd have an Inquisitor and his warband, and his warband could be any of these things. So we had 3 different Inquisitors, 3 very different archetypes of Inquisitor, and then we had 12 more models just to explore the coolest things. And again, the irony being that they were deliberately kind of developed as things that you probably would never see on a battlefield. And I think probably 2/3 of them are now in 40K, in actual armies and stuff like, death cultists and Death
Yeah.
Watch
Yeah,
and,
some of the models
and
are insane.
Archoflagellants and
Yeah.
Beautiful. The idea of Malleus and Hereticus and in Inquisition all kind of stems from that idea that there was fights within the Inquisition, or did that exist beforehand?
Again, I suppose one of the things I tried to do was reposition, because there hadn't been anything done for the Inquisition for a long, long time, really, since the Realm of Chaos books. And the old original Realm of Chaos books had some stuff about the Ordo Malleus. So that was the first one that was created. It was the Ordo Malleus, the Hammer, and they were the Demon Hunters. And then there was the Grey Knights, which were a chamber militant of the Ordo Malleus. So that was the first part. And that was it, really. And then later on, Ordo Xenos, I don't know who first kind of coined that phrase. That popped up somewhere before I started, I think. And potentially Ordo Hereticus as a name, but it wasn't much more. And then when I wrote the first 40K Sister Battle Codex, which is like the first codex I worked on, I sort of talked about the founding of the Ordo Hereticus during the Reign of Blood and Age of Apostasy and stuff. So basically a bunch of Inquisitors going, all right, actually, we need to focus on the ecclesiarchy. This is an issue now, so I'm going to make it my mission to make sure that these religious schisms don't threaten the Imperium again, kind of stuff. So that was the idea. We had these, and there'd been sort of like some association between the Ordo Hereticus, Inquisition, and the Sisters of Battle. So it wasn't a hard and fast thing like the Ordo Malleus and the Grey Knights, but it was, the ecclesiarchy and the Inquisitors were linked. So that meant that Ordo Xenos was this bit that was like, oh, great, cool. And I didn't want to do something that was like a chapter like the Grey Knights, and didn't want to do a completely new troop like the Sisters of Battle, because we knew we wanted to do a 54mm Space Marine, because why wouldn't you want to make money?
Yeah, exactly.
And then Jez was going to design it, and it was going to be cool, but it couldn't just be like, here is AN Ultramarine, and again, just to give people that flexibility, it's like, okay, this needs to be a sort of type of Space Marine that people can paint in any colours they want, but they're not actually that type of Space Marine. And so I came up with the idea of like these Ordo Xenos Death Watch, these Space Marines that are sent from it. And so your guy can be from any chapter you want. And obviously people have modelled so many amazing conversions of like Space Wolves and Blood Angels and all kinds of other stuff out of Artemis. But yeah, and the idea was there wasn't many of these, kind of Death Watch, and actually they kind of could lead kill teams, and if it was a really big threat, you might get a squad of these guys turn up, or they're in orbit looking over like ancient void gates and Catan worlds and all this kind of stuff, and that was, so it's like the Death Watch. So again, it's all kind of from the practicality of having one Space Marine model, but there could be various things, and there being a slot like, well, we don't have Space Marines associated with this particular ordo. And then, so the Ordos were kind of like this, they're kind of specialities, and they kind of talk to each other. But one of the things we wanted to get back with the Inquisition kind of background is the base unit, the base kind of level of the Inquisition is an Inquisitor. An Inquisitor has an Inquisitorial symbol and can basically has the power to kind of requisition whatever they want. So it kind of didn't make sense. They don't need their own armies, because the point is they go up to an Imperial Guard colonel and go, here you go, you recognise this? Yeah, your army belongs to me now. Or a governor. And obviously the politics on the ground might be different, and that Inquisitor may suddenly disappear, but such is the if any other Inquisitors found out, because their entire existence requires this kind of reputation for like, well, if you mess with us, you just disappear, kind of thing. Because actually, that's all they got is that symbol, and what that symbol represents has to be absolute authority and power. Yeah. Because if it doesn't, you have none. And so that was this idea. You've got the core is an Inquisitor and this warband, and the warband, we couldn't have an army, so it'd just be this kind of like mishmash of crazy, like tech priests and like say Archoflagellants and whatever. And that was a combination of kind of John Blanche sketches. Alan Merrick kind of one day just kind of sent me this list of titles he could come up with of like Chrono Gladiators and Archoflagellants, and he had no idea what they were. And then I added a bunch of my own as well, of just like mashing words together, and John would have a thing. And then so I wrote the background for those kinds of stuff, and then fleshed them out into what they were. And and John saw some of those and drew some more pictures. The Perrys, so Alan and Michael Perry were just doing some test models, which got later released. They were Imperial Guard, like basic kind of Acadians. But again, it's like, well, we didn't want Cadians, but that was just kind of like test of the molding and all that kind of stuff. But then it's like, well, what we're going to have is actually a Gland War veteran who's a different, so he's not your regular Imperial Guard, he's a special Imperial Guard one-off type thing. But it's kind of, all of that stuff really stuck. People really liked it. And whether they, and obviously a lot of people now play at 28 mil and all this kind of stuff. But actually, so much of that history and background and lore, and even just reintroducing that concept of narrative gaming, of like so the role-playing aspects, not just play to win, not just about lining an army up on a pitched battle, but actually having a scenario, a games master. I cribbed very heavily from Rogue Trader because again, that was the first version of 40k I played, and lots of D100 tables, to roll on and stuff, because that's what you want. And again, scenarios that some of the Inquisitor scenarios are basically just updated versions of cool scenarios that were from Rogue Trader, and deliberately tapping into that memory of people who played it, or that idea of it. And again, this is where this new version, these ideas now live in Inquisitor. And like 20 years later, and very little support for the last 15, they're still going in one way or another. And that's very gratifying actually to know that amongst everything else, that kind of resonates with people.
Well, we know people.
I remember, I remember it at the time just being so interesting for pretty much the reasons you said, where it was just like, it was kind of like this, like a kind of a microscope held up to the larger game, like you had all these Space Marine armies and stuff, but you didn't get to peek behind the kind of staff only door, where all the administrators were, and that was what was so good about it. And obviously the models were, I remember seeing them and thinking like, what, is this someone bought this like amazing model from another company? It would just seem crazy that they were making that size, but like, but they still stick in my mind as really cool models. And like you say, they've appeared in one form or another on the table these days. So that's So,
well, so the other thing I really liked what we did with Inquisitor, which touched on what we were talking about earlier, which was actually in the kind of color section of the book, because there were so few models and it is all about kind of creating your own characters. We had loads of stuff like kind of custom built conversions from studio staff and other people around the Games Workshop headquarters and stuff. And some of them, like at my warband, I'm not an heavy metal painter. Some of the paint jobs, like Ali Morrison did did an ogre out of a Warhammer giant and that kind of stuff. But then other people just kind of kit bashing stuff together, or using AD Wood with like various kill robots and things like that he put together, and it was great because it was a celebration of creativity as well, because that was again, that was a very different thing. It's like, well, we know because it's all about bespoke, unique characters fighting with these Inquisitors, we can't make all the models for this. It is aimed at veterans who can model, who can put bits together, and obviously the one bit that kind of stuck, I think, for most people actually was scenery. I think that was the difficulty, because the models kind of deserved really kind of cool and exotic kind of locations and things, but you wanted to have variety because, of course, you didn't want the same scenario being played over essentially, some golf course in Kent green terrain, like a lot of like 1990s.
Like a train set, Inquisitor on a train set.
So that was quite a lot of work, because there wasn't any kind of off-the-shelf terrain. So the terrain modelling was quite an important bit, but obviously is quite a barrier to a lot of people. So again, these days, actually having, there's lots more terrain sets, which actually might, because the scale is always big. Anyway, quite a lot of the new terrain would probably work quite well with 54mm models anyway. But also, just thinking these days, like with the amount of plastics and the technology that GW has, doing 54mm models in modern plastics and all the swappability and posability and stuff would be amazing. But I don't think we'll see that soon.
We could 40k up a Barbie playset house or something and get that.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Fireside Chat with Gav Thorpe will be back momentarily. So I think there was a bit of a preview on today. So we've got a few new models to talk about briefly, which I think that you and Matt and Welsh, you guys watched this. So what were the highlights for you?
There was quite a lot to go through, actually, in the Faith and Damnation side of things. So I've just picked some of the models to go through rather than go through the whole lot. I really liked these Blood Knights for Age of Sigmar. The vampire models
really,
we've talked about
really
recently
crisp.
have all been great, and these are the armor, the barding on the skeleton horses is so detailed. You know, if you can edge highlight, this will make your edge highlight in part. That's
mate.
for sure.
Yeah, this is actually pretty good practice if you wanted
It's
to
so
practice
sharp.
it.
Yeah, so sharp. It looks like you could cut your finger on it.
Yeah, no, they're very cool. More wins for the vampires. So if you're thinking about doing some vampire stuff, like definitely go for it.
And then on the other hand, Matt and I were very kind of not disappointed. We just couldn't find a way to love the Ostariarch Bone Reapers in any form, really, let alone these kind of new comedy Harryhausenhower, or however you say that word, skeletons.
They're very beefy skeletons, these new designs, aren't they? These skeletons
really
are pretty
weird.
fucking hench. Which is quite bizarre. They've sort of lost a lot of the things that make a skeleton, like having bones and stuff, you know.
Yeah.
But I quite like the big guy, the guy with the big axe thing. I think he's kind of cool. But yeah, it's funny because this is all sort of going back to the Kamari type stuff, isn't it? Which obviously is out of print now in Games Workshop. Is it the Kamari, the the kind of
Khemri.
Egyptian-y, Khemri, that's it, the Egyptian-y type guys. So this is obviously kind of like a sort of a gentle toe in the water there with maybe a new Kamari range.
A Japanese kind of twisted version of that. They've got that samurai kind of appeal, but I think their whole lore is that they build themselves out of bone rather than they are skeletons. But it just looks, it just doesn't look as cool as if they were skeletons, I don't think.
He's weird. His proportions look a bit strange. It works better on the bigger models, but the smaller ones, they just look like Chad skeletons. It's just a bit weird.
I do definitely want that scythe. We can cut that off. We can add that to the list of LBP cut and steals.
Oh, mate, yeah. So I'm excited about these because this, I think, might be one of the first Large Blast predictions to actually come true, and that is that some redemptionists are coming for Necromunda. So I think a couple of episodes ago we had a peek at a rumor engine, and I felt pretty sure it was a redemptionist, and boom, it's only goddamn redemptionists back again in all their Ku Klux Klanian glory.
Yeah, amazing. We couldn't quite get to the bottom of what they were saying today, but I think they are part of a Cawdor gang, and they're not a separate gang yet. These are add-ons to a Cawdor gang, but they're just wild. The models, guys with fire pits on their head and stained glass windows on their head, which Matt and I decided was to reflect light back at snipers trying to take you out. That's the only reason we could think of for a stained glass hat.
Is this the first time you're seeing them, Stoney? Have you seen them?
Well, this is I mean, this is the first time I've seen these new builds, but again, much like the Balak model, I recognise the models that they're built from for sure.
Because they released the picture of the whole squad, if you like. So you should check them out. They are. Do
they have the crazy? They must have the crazy chainsaw wielding guy then. So
he's there
nice.
With the exact weapon we saw, and then this guy who's got the chain axe version of that. And basically every single model in the gang has just got a flamethrower or a flamer strapped with bits of, like, I don't know, elastic bands to some other weapon. They're all combi flamers of some form. So
definitely buying these guys. I'm getting these guys.
I mean,
again, this takes some confidence to stroll into battle with your fucking head on fire. So there's the brass balls on these guys.
Do you think they've seen a picture of the Legion of the Damned and they're doing their best to represent it with their fiery skirts and fiery helmets?
I think it's just cold in Necromunda, like you got a robe on, shit gets cold. You just got like keep a fire on you. It lights the way. You can cook a sausage on it. It's handy.
Okay, and then the 40K reveals. Then Matt, take us away on this one.
Oh man, I mean, we knew we were going to get this Skitarii HQ model, which we'd seen the outline of and lots of little previews months ago now. But they dropped the codex as well. They didn't really say that much, but this glorious piece of artwork was previewed, which is the front cover of the book, which is the only bit you got to see in the preview earlier today, and it is an amazing piece of artwork. It's one of the best pieces of artwork I've seen for years from Games Workshop. It's got all the classic Blanchitsu, classic 40k parts without any of the new cartoony stuff that's on some of the Space Marine codices. It's great. And the Skitarii model is wicked as well.
Yeah, that Skitarii model is very cool. It's very different from the other Skitarii stuff. It's got a lot more kind of personality than some of the other stuff, which obviously is designed not to be a bit personality less. Whereas this guy he's got a bit of swagger to him, But yeah, it's very cool. I actually saw someone post a picture of this, and I thought it was a conversion that someone had done. And I was like, I gave them a bunch of likes because I thought that they'd done some cool conversion. But I've got to go back and retract these likes now because I've been bamboozled.
I was saying to Matt when we were watching this live earlier, Stoney, that cover work for the Codex is perfect 40k in that most of it is a kind of bionic, multi-armed, multi-wired man. And then in the right-hand side, there's still someone writing in a paper book with a quill.
Yeah, I see him. And the size of the quill on him as well.
Yeah,
That's how 40k. Yeah. That's how you know it's how 40k it is by the size of the quills.
It's a bloody big bird.
It's an amazing picture. And it's so this is going to be new rules. Everything you excited about that, Matt?
Oh yeah, really excited. There's been so many models added to the AdMech range that aren't in my book anymore. It's must be like 40% of the units that I can use in a game now aren't in my codex. They're all in different books. So the magic that they've done with the Space Marines and the Necrons, I'm sure we'll see it again added to the AdMech with all the new additions that 9th edition offers you as a gamer. But to have everything in one place obviously is great. Hopefully we'll get more artwork like this in the book, which would be amazing. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm just looking forward to flicking through the book.
They made it sound like a number of armies are getting this kind of role fulfilled now, that this Skitarii Marshal, this new thing, is going to act a bit like a chaplain for you. So kind of buffs in the same way chaplains give buffs. Necron's got the models that do that same kind of thing. I feel like you might kind of have that role fulfilled as well for the first time. Okay, the last of the 40k stuff then, I've put together because I think they're a real juxtaposition of very 40k and very not. And they're the Castigator, the new heavy tank for the Adeptus Sororitas, and this new Beast Snaggers, squig riding orcs. Stoney, I don't know if you've seen these yet. What do you think?
I have done. I did see the Beasts Squagners or whatever they are.
They're called snaggers. I think their idea is that they go hunting for things.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, I saw those, and that is weird. I mean, this is a bit like a Zote and a Squig had a baby, and then you've got an orc on top of it, and the model just looks a bit shit, to be honest. I don't know if it's like it's a funny angle paint job type thing, but it doesn't seem as sharp as a lot of the stuff that we've seen coming out of Games Workshop recently. So I'm a bit disappointed with that. A couple of orcs riding on a fucking hot dog. But the tank does look. The tank is pretty badass. And again, it's just a fucking pimped out sort of predator type thing, really, isn't it? But fuck, it looks cool.
Yeah, that's basically what we said. That it's a straight up predator. I was a bit funny. I think there's a little bit too much hanging off it, but that's just personal taste.
I'm sure that some of that stuff could be optional, though. Do you know what I mean? I've just noticed what's really cool is it's got these like statue icons built into the side. I mean, it's really ornate. It's got all sorts of stuff all over it, but those icons are cool as shit.
Yeah, the orc riding the Beast Snaggers is, like you said about the Skitarii Marshal, is fulfilling a role within like almost a standard template army list. And this Beast Snaggers, as soon as it came up in the preview, I thought, oh, that's just an orc version of my my cowboys.
The Wiki Wild Wild West.
And as soon as I saw that and thought that, I thought, oh, they're definitely going to bring out Imperial Guard on motorbikes as like, or new Rough Riders is coming, definitely. Maybe Rough Riders.
I just think it looks.
It's just a bit Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, it looks. If that had been part of an Age of Sigmar for review for snake bites, I'd think, yeah, great. But
I don't know.
I do quite like it, though. I quite like it.
I want to see it for some more angles, just because, like, well, just how we're looking at this picture that we've got of it, it just doesn't look right to me.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, we return you to an evening with Gav Thorpe.
As a Raven Guard player, I can't let you go, Gav, without asking you about the main man. And just in general, the writing process behind something as crazy and detailed as the Horus Heresy, in terms of how do you know what you're allowed to do within your own book and how it fits into the greater scheme of things?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about the Heresy, certainly for most of the Heresy, up until sort of like Deliverance Lost and around about that time, was actually, it started off as a Black Library only project. It was the only stuff that had been done. Obviously, there was history in 40K, but it was just snippets, really. Well, stuff in Epic and Adeptus Titanicus and stuff, and some bits and pieces about the Heresy in terms of Chaos and the Chaos Legions and things like that. But it was actually a fairly open space to develop. And then Alan Merritt had worked with Sabretooth Games to do the collectible card game based on Horus Heresy, and he'd gone back to a lot of that. The good thing is, I mean, they'd already collated a lot of the existing material and put it in one place to review it, and he was basing a lot of the stuff, and he expanded on it and added a few battles and stuff. But essentially, was just generating some background for the collectible card game, and at which point it was decided it might be a good space for Black Library to explore. Having one of the edicts at the time being that there would never be 40K Horus Heresy. Yeah, because people buy enough Space Marines as it is, and why would they want to play with more Space Marines? It's the Horus Heresy, and there would never be Primarchs in 40K. So that's two things anyway. Back then, which I was.
Isn't it called Indomitus, the book you wrote recently?
Yeah, well, exactly. So at the time, it's like, okay, but we can explore the Horus Heresy through Black Library, because it's never going to hit the 40K tabletop and stuff. And of course, it was a very big success, so then Ford Rail got involved and started doing those amazing black books and all the rest of it. But so there was that period where actually we didn't have anything apart from that core material, and essentially what went into the first Visions of Heresy or Collected Visions book or whatever it was, which was all the card art and all the background from the collectible card game. So that made it quite easy. And then and then the other main thing was the Index Astartes articles that had been written. So like there was the 18 first founding Index Astartes first founding articles in White Dwarf, which were sort of like a nice whistle-stop tour of each of the legions. Now obviously later on, as I say, Forge World got involved. But again, that's always very collaborative, and they were kind of, because they were behind the timeline of the main series, it was more a case of like, oh, they've invented a cool tank, which we haven't mentioned before, but so we'll start mentioning them now, and doing a lot more on the founding of the legions and the kind of Great Crusade and stuff like that than was needed for the Heresy series. So it kind of got more complicated as it came along, and obviously the Heresy series itself started building its own weight and storylines and characters and stuff. But for me, it wasn't too bad, because my introduction had been to do this audio, which was called Raven's Flight, which is about Corax and the Raven Guard and how they escaped the massacre at Istan, the Dropsite Massacre and stuff, and what happened next, sort of thing. So that essentially put me on a fairly parallel path to everything else that was going on. So the Raven Guard kind of have their own story in a way, looking at the background, because they get almost wiped out at Istvan, tried to rebuild their numbers, it doesn't go very well, and essentially they spend the rest of the Heresy doing their kind of shadow war, hit and run type guerrilla attacks. So, and they're not at the Siege of Terror. They don't. The last we saw it was self-contained.
The last we saw of Corax was Shadow of the Past, right? Like facing up against Lorgar and your little mini, little short. Do you see any route for him to ever come back, or do you think he's way down the GW priority list?
I generally don't know, because as I said, for my 14 years plus, 14 years in the studio plus a little bit of time the Black Library until it's like the reality was no Primarchs in 40k. They're not very, it's like they don't fit 40k. They're all, they belong in Horus Heresy. The Galaxy does, it's like, and that's one of the things, because obviously a little bit of a spoiler, but in the Beast Arises we get to play with a bit of a Primarch for that as well. But that is the idea, is that the galaxy the Primarchs existed in, at least the loyalist ones, at the end of 40k, at the end of the Heresy, no longer exists. They are out of time. They don't fit the world of mortals anymore. Paradise has been lost, and all the rest of it. And actually, one by one, they either just run off to go crazy and run off into the warp to go and fight again, or sort of get themselves killed, or just disappear or whatever. They're kind of like these liminal figures that then just disappear into myth, because they no longer have a place in the world without the Emperor in particular there to guide them, lead them, do whatever. And with the imperial truth broken by the Horus Heresy, the Primarchs no longer have a role. This is the slow death of the Imperium and humanity and stuff. So in that regard, I didn't have to do too much research, particularly because I was just creating my own kind of little sub-universe in the Horus Heresy, which was around the Raven Guard and Corax. But of course, there's bits of it, and then it starts to overlap when they start interacting with the Space Wolves, be it Garmin, and well, not actually happy to Garmin, but around that sort of time, and trying to make them have an impact without having to like force it was the idea. So that there's certain things that the Raven Guard did. The Raven Guard didn't turn up like with 50,000 troops at the Siege of Terror, because that's not their thing. But actually, their interventions they made had an effect. They slowed Horus, they reduced some of his forces, they allowed the Space Wolves to escape execution. They did various things essentially, all the while Corax, and I'm kind of focusing, because here's a story about the Primarchs, so trying to focus on Corax's personal arc of kind of being this sort of political idealist, I suppose, in some ways, but actually, this freedom fighter who ends up kind of like being confronted with the great lie of his own existence. The fact that he's a creation of the Emperor. That's
what I love about him.
And him, and through the duplicity of the enemy as well, but his own doubt. The thing is, once he starts doubting himself, that's the worst thing. And I think that's one of the things to try to get across, is like his doubts is what kind of is his downfall, not what anything the enemies does, but because he thinks he's got it wrong. Because the only thing he's got is his righteousness, really, in a way. It's like if he's fighting for the right side, if he feels himself morally right, he can do terrible things. He is, I always said he is Conrad Kurz, except he'll feel bad afterwards about what he does.
There's that bit in Deliverance Lost where he kills the prisoner, and so I can't remember who it is, someone looks up at him, and it's kind of like that's the shock, like that's the cusp of being Kurz.
Right, no, absolutely.
He does, which I love.
He will absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing, because he's got that layer underneath him where he goes, but it's like, I will happily nuke a planet. If I think the cause is right. It's like, and he has that, and that's ingrained in him. That is his. That's the part of the Emperor, part of the Emperor's personality that he has, which is that absolute clarity of purpose. But as soon as he's confronted by something that casts that into doubt, they go, maybe you're wrong. It all starts to unravel for him, because he just suddenly sees mistakes and compromises, and like I say, getting suddenly, his moral core has disappeared by the end of it, and all he can do is think about wiping himself and any kind of mistakes he's made from the universe. His only solution is actually to remove himself and his creations and disappear. And that's it, to have nothing to do with people again, because actually he feels himself inherently corrupt, as opposed to having to have an assassin sent after him.
we're probably going to move on very shortly, but I just wanted to get a quick question in about you mentioned that the galaxy in 30k is almost a completely different galaxy to the one in 40k. How do you go about writing a Space Marine in 30k with comparison to a Space Marine in 40k, or even a Primarchs Space Marine in 40k? And we mentioned Indomitus. Like the character, the characters must be. How do you go about the different character changes?
I think, yeah, I mean, a lot of it was kind of established by Dan in like the first book, really, in Horus Rising, and Graham and Ben in the sort of, what you have to remember is that the Space Marines in 40k have had 10,000 years of superstition and indoctrination and chapter culture and things like that. Whereas actually, although there's still kind of a bit of mysticism and things around certain stuff, particularly from the Mechanicus, and obviously the warp is a whole other thing that nobody's talking about in 30k. But actually, the thing about 30k is it's the Emperor's a scientist. He's a rational being, or at least this part of him is, that deals with like the creation of the Space Marines and the Primarchs and things like that. Although there is an element of the warp, we're never quite sure what actually, there's something about the warp in the creation of the Primarch stuff, but essentially it's still essentially a scientific process of genetic engineering and all the rest of it stuff. The original legions, I think one of the things that, particularly again in the Black books, has done really well is the idea of, well, these legions that were founded aren't necessarily the legions that then ended up at the Siege of Terror in terms of their personalities, even the ones that didn't fall to chaos and go completely mental and hack people's heads off and stick babies on their shoulder pads or whatever. It's like, and some of those, some of that was jarring, some of it wasn't quite so jarring, some of it, the personalities of pretty much had to purge the entire Terran legions and all that kind of stuff. But all of that is still under this kind of aegis of the imperial truth and rationalism and things like that. And it's only and right in the Siege of Terror at the moment is the point, is that transition. It's one of the things it's quite fun, is where you start seeing like people like Sigismund becoming actual proper, like the Templars and various other characters, as faith and the warp and chaos has its effect on the Imperium, on the Space Marines, on rationality itself.
I think
that's where it degrades.
I really love that your bit in the first wall, where Perturabo kind of starts to lose some of his logic as he comes head to head with Dawn. I think that play backwards and forwards really shows the kind of the science and the sensibility is being lost as that battle wages on. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's much more of that kind of really follows through in. On essentially the rest, that's the start of it. And as we go through into John French's book Mortis, there's much more of that idea. And one of the things, and when we're talking about it, one of the things we talked about in the meetings is the idea of like, it starts off as the Legion's War, the Legionary War, but actually the interlegionary war, but actually by the end of it, it's the Chaos War, and they're not the same. And actually, people are, how Abaddon has to deal with this kind of stuff. All the Sons of Horus have to, and they either follow their Primarch into this abyss or they don't, and all that kind of stuff. But it's the same on the other side. Chaos, affects everybody slightly differently, but actually, like the effect on the Raven Guard and Korax, or the Iron Hands, profoundly affected by the early death of their Primarch. The Salamanders on the hunt for Vulcan and things like that then has 10,000 years of stewing, essentially, through mysticism and superstition and repeated kind of chapter culture and stuff into something very different. And also just the Space Marines' role from being like the front line of essentially the Emperor's armies, backed up by these massive fleets of the Imperial Army, and it was the Imperial Army then; it wasn't split into the Guard and Navy. But they were like the pointy end of it. But they were still like hundreds of thousands, millions of Space Marines at this time, to being these cloistered kind of warrior monk adepts for the most part that are kind of called upon. And there's not enough of them to do the job they need to do, and that's kind of the point. Is like by 40k, the Space Marines they've literally had their power taken away by their own greatest general. He disbanded the legions, he broke them up so that nobody could wield them again. Again, if we're saying like the Primarchs have no place, technically, the Space Marines don't really either, but they're still around. and kind of fulfilling this very symbolic role as much as a physical military role, as that continuity. And then so to get onto the Primaris, right, then you've got this other step forward, which is this really weird thing, which is like, again, you've got these Space Marines that kind of know a lot about their chapters because they've had cool beaming stuff into their brains about whatever, but actually they're not grown up for it. They're not grown up often in the same worlds, that the recruits come from necessarily. They're from all over. They're from Terra and all over at the time of the end of the Heresy.
Yeah.
But they've got the gene seed, but that doesn't mean that. But that doesn't necessarily make them. And they've got the knowledge of like a lot of the chapter rights or the Legion kind of information, but they've not lived the life. They've not been inducted through the chapter rights. They've not had the chaplains like inserting all of that chapter culture into them since they were like 12 or 13 years old. For 10 years and psychodoctrination and everything else. So they're intellectually associated with these chapters, but kind of spiritually and as far as Space Marines get emotionally, they're not part of that society, and that's one of the difficulties they have with reintegrating the Primaris with, or the unnumbered suns in particular, the Primaris that have already been created with the chapters. Some chapters it works okay, others not so much.
Yeah. As a writer, is that almost like a clean slate, or is that a bit of a conundrum to try and fit these new Space Marines in with the old ones?
I tried to, for me, in Indomitors, I tried to go a bit. They're kind of more like the Legionnaires. They're because they were created by Call at that time. Again, they haven't had 10,000 years of just of layered kind of irrationality, I suppose, and stuff. So. And they're more, but they are more machine-like in some ways because of that as well. Because they're programmed killers. They're much more kind of like. More mechanical, because it is almost mechanical learning that they've had and things. So they do things more. So they're probably not as indoctrinated as a 40K as a firstborn Space Marine, but they're kind of. But in some ways, they are more dogmatic in that they don't. They're more likely to respond in very certain ways because they've been in. That's what calls programmed into in terms of their fighting style, the way they look at the world, and whatever else it might mean. It's like an intellectual version rather than a spiritual version of what those Space Marines should be. But obviously, as they have more contact with our chapters and start to take on those beliefs and kind of structures and things, then they obviously become more like them. They lose some of that rationality. They lose and in order to integrate, they have to take on that culture.
Yeah.
And then, of course, actually, by the end of like the Indomitors Crusade, actually the chapters are raising their own Primaris anyway. So they're picking up 12, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, whatever, and turning them into Space Marines through the chapter cult, whatever. So a Primaris at the start of the Indomitors Crusade isn't the same as a Primaris at the end of the Indomitors Crusade either. In the same way that a Legionnaire at the start of the Heresy isn't the same as a Legionnaire at the end of the Heresy.
Yeah.
Because
the
experiences.
It's been representing that in the models too. The more recent models having more scrolls and random bits and markings and things on the armor. It's been quite clever how they've done that.
Yeah. That's it, and that's one of the things we're trying to be careful of in the Siege of Terror, is like making references. It's like the difference between a purity seal and an oath of moment. It's like they're two very different ideals, really. Although physically may look similar on a miniature. These are this thing, these are these things, and also it's kind of. It's nice to show that progression through individual characters as well. Like say we see, Loken being a good example, like somebody there right at the start, and then we see him at the end.
Fully religious now.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and all kinds of stuff of just being exposed to the truth about how the galaxy really works.
I know you mentioned before that that a lot of the rules are obviously pulled straight from the lore kind of thing. Is there how much is that in your mind when you're writing the lore, or do you just not think about that at all? Do you think like, oh, I can't wait to see this on the battlefield, or is that just not really something that crosses your mind?
Well, mostly it's been a case, particularly because, of course, Forge World have dealt with most of it. There's a little bits of it, like the studio have done a couple of box games, like the Thousand Suns and the Trail at Calf. But actually, mostly it's a case of like, they've Forge created all this cool stuff. I need to try and incorporate that into my presentation of these legions, particularly because I think they kind of opened the box a lot more. I think there's not. I suppose it wasn't really conscious, but actually, again, just the sheer size, the scale of the legions changed. Kind of over the perception of how big these are changed over the course of the first kind of half of the Heresy books. But also, just actually, these aren't just like I say, these aren't just kind of like big versions of a Space Marine chapter. They've got all kinds of organization and weapons and tanks and things that have all just disappeared. They've all been lost over the years. And Forge World really kind of tore the lid off that and started making cool, giving them super heavy tanks and all this kind of stuff. And that kind of gave us license. Yeah. And we were like, we've been really pedestrian, really, in our portrayal of the Space Marines and the Legions, particularly. And that's where stuff starts going really. So we go, let's go really crazy, then let's start giving them stuff. But I did have the one thing that I did deliberately create that I hoped Forge World would do, which was from the Lion novella, which is the Mastodon. Which is this kind of big kind of semi super heavy transport.
Yeah. So it's like the size of a remote control car. The actual model of that, isn't it? It's huge. Yeah,
absolutely. And later on, actually, I can't remember which one it is, but Korax takes one out in one of the later novellas, which was quite fun. I think.
You had to.
So it was great that they chose to pick that one. It was almost there's a couple of things like the Whisper Cutter and stuff like that thrown into the Raven Guard that hopefully maybe one day they might pick up on. And the Shadow Hawk.
I hope so.
But the idea like reflex shields and stuff like that did make their way into versions of the background and stuff like that as well. So it's nice to see it when it's not, because the thing is, when I was working in the studio, or whatever, and I came up with a cool bit of background, I could write it into the rules. It's like it was a hard link if I wanted to. Where it's nice actually to inspire. It's different to inspire somebody to put it into the rules rather than like, I've had a cool idea, I get to make Space Marines do this. It's like actually somebody else, a sculptor or a writer or whoever, combination of that sort of thing, liked the idea enough that they decided to do it.
And do you find, does it often come out how you've kind of seen it in your head, when somebody does something like that?
Usually that's pretty good. I mean, it's really nice. One of the things I love seeing is when people have done like conversions or fan art or whatever of characters or things that I've done. Because they're usually, when you're writing, it varies from character to character or thing to think about how specific your image of it is, because sometimes you're concentrating on personality and voice more than physical attributes and stuff. So you might actually not even necessarily give too much of a physical description. So, what people come up with, suddenly go, that's cool. Yeah, that definitely fits. And then sometimes, there is quite obvious physical characteristics that you want them to have, and somebody's modeled those on those ideas and incorporated, little details that you've mentioned. You go, that's really cool because they've given him that sword that I mentioned had this kind of thing in the hilt or whatever, and that's really nice as well. Seeing that again, seeing fans inspired, saying, actually, I've fought a battle that was, or my army's collected from this scene or whatever, is really nice. It's a nice feedback that you don't get with other types of fiction. You can only do that with games fiction and particularly miniatures games, because again, it's not like unless somebody's getting into serious modding on their PC games, it's like actually you don't get a lot of that anywhere else.
We'll return to the final part of our 4PM interview after this quick random topic generator.
Welcome back, everybody, to this part of the show, the most exciting part of the show, where we let Lady Luck choose our fate with the random topic generator, where we roll a dice and find out which topic we will be talking about. So, Welshie, do you have the company dice?
As always, here they are. I'm rolling.
Okay, roll the company dice.
It's a 6.
It's a 6.
Which Xenos faction would you join if they were recruiting?
Okay. All right, so who we got? We got Orcs, we got Tau, Necrons, Eldar, and Dark Eldar, and Tyranids.
Yeah. I think it's worth. I think we should say that maybe if you pick it, you kind of morph into that shape. You don't have to be.
Oh yeah, no, I wouldn't just expect me just hanging out with the Tyranids. I'm just a human. Like,
we're not Giganobs.
Like, glad to be on the team, boys. Just going around shaking all the Tyranids' hands. Like,
I think I'd probably join the Eldar.
What kind of faction? Part of the Eldar?
Maybe Craft World Eldar, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, because then you can die and come back alive, and you live for ages, and yeah, you can have one of those grinks, the little pet cats, and so I could have a pet cat.
Well, I forgot to have a cat, then yeah, Eldar does sound pretty good, to be fair. I was listening to Lorehammer podcast about the...
what?
I listened to another podcast. Well, no, I'm actually, to be fair, I'm going to big them up on this one because we did a Eldar podcast where we just looked at pictures of Eldar and said what we thought they did. So, like, if you actually want to find out something about Eldar, then the Lorehammer one was good. But they did one about this, about the cities in the Dark Eldar cities, Kamora. I think it was called.
Yeah.
And like that sounded pretty crazy, where it's all just like you can like just show up at a homunculus, be like, stick another leg on me, buddy. I'm going to start a speed running gang or something, and just fucking, super opulent, but also fucking crazy and nasty. Which would be the bad part of living there, but hopefully, I reckon Dark Eldar.
Is that where you're going?
No, I don't know. It might be interesting if I have to go there. If I can
go and fight in the pits.
Well, yeah, maybe. But then if I could just be a normal Eldar and get a cat. So maybe I'll just do that.
See, I'm thinking I might split the difference between you guys because I feel like the Eldar might be a bit dull and I might spend the whole time polishing my spirit stones, which would just not be great, petting my cat. And the Dark Eldar, I'm not really into being flayed and like raped over and over again. So...
Well, no one said anything about that bit. I'm not... Whoa.
I don't know how deep you went into Komora, Stoney, but there's certainly some of that going on.
Ah, shit.
So I reckon I could split the difference maybe and go Harlequin, because those guys just seem like they're always having a great time.
Choice.
I could put on some sweet leggings.
Oh, yeah, no, I see where you're coming from. But I do think that like hanging out with other Harlequins could become quite grating after a while because it's like a constant performance thing, isn't it? They're always doing it. It's just like, I'm just trying to watch
Dr.
the telly
Zeus as well.
Yeah, exactly. They've got.
okay.
Yeah, you're just trying to chill out.
There's the Exodites which ride dinosaurs, and people make armies of them. The Exodites that go, they're like they're just free and they just go around.
They're in that Trazin book. The Trazin,
are they?
Yeah, they're in that.
But interestingly, and I need to write this down for when we do speak to Gav again. But we asked him about Chaos Eldar, and he straight up said yes. And I've got loads to talk about that. And we left it.
Forgot about it.
Yeah, there's that, and there was something else. Can't. Yeah, there's some real nuggets in there that we need to really get the information out from.
I think so. So maybe actually
Chaos
might have
Eldar.
swayed me away from Eldar a little bit too much poetry, and maybe I'd just be a Jacaro and
that's a good idea.
Technology and live happy.
Yeah. To be fair though, the simple life of an orc does sound kind of appealing. Being like being like an orc mech boy where you just like fucking stick things together and make them work. That sounds kind of fun. Just hammer shit.
What would you? And now you know what squigs you need for different tasks.
Yeah, get the hot dog squig.
Yeah,
all of it. It'd be great.
Medical squig.
Yeah, medical squig. Couple of roller skate squigs. Everything I want. I'll just be squigging it up.
Have we done it then? Have we solved another random topic generator?
All right, so I think we're all going to be Eldar, aren't we? So Eldar and a Jacaro.
I'm a Jacaro. Maybe I'll hang around with the Harlequins until they get too annoying.
Ladies and gentlemen, you rejoin us now for the final part of our Gav Thorpe interview.
Gav, earlier you mentioned with the formation of the Inquisitor game that you kind of mismatched different names, almost pulling names out of a hat, and very weirdly, we wanted to do a segment which is also pulling names out of a hat.
Right. Try that.
Just get your 1 minute description of the Legion that we happened to pull out of a hat.
Yeah.
Oh right. Okay.
We're making
This is something that we've
Legion.
done. We've done this on a previous episode where we tried to sort of backwards engineer one of the lost Primarchs, basically, and we came up with a legion called the Moist Fists. Who were essentially it was bad. It was very bad. But
they were led by a Tommy Bahama shirt wearing Primarch called Aquarium Fistula, who went catfishing on the weekends. So that's the kind of level we're looking for.
Okay, fine. I'm trying to, yes.
So we normally pick an adjective and then some kind of animal out of the hat. So
sounds like, I'm sure that's exactly how the Emperor did it.
Well, Ultramarines is a poor name, let's be honest. Okay.
We have sins of the past.
We've got Creamy and Hogs. The Creamy Hogs.
Creamy Hogs.
Maybe that's why they were wiped out. Maybe they were wiped from Imperial.
Yeah, definitely. They're too creamy. Creamy Hogs. See, because Hogs is all right. I mean, I can kind of almost like, sort of like see
Space Marine.
Hoggish. Yeah, hoggish qualities.
Space
but also
hogs.
like space hogs. Yeah. Well, maybe that's it. But, maybe creamy. Maybe they just painted themselves creamy. But, sort of like... perhaps that's the thing about the creamy hogs is actually their recruitment is they pretty much take anybody. They're actually kind of had this massive recruitment drives of just like they really just put people through the sausage machine, as it were, to see what came out. Not even necessarily pre-selecting the candidates and stuff. So it's just like, we'll just chuck it. Just this voracious legion that kind of like almost kind of absorbed whole populations to kind
like
of
a war of attrition going. Legion or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And just
through the meat grinder.
They're more of a quantity over quality style legion kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And just forage, but very good, very independent, foraging, surviving on their own.
Oh yeah. Heightened smells. They could get nuts and acorns.
Well, and also, and very straightforward. Obviously, just like. If you mess with the hog, you get the tusks.
Yeah. That could be their saying, their expression. Yeah.
What about Primarch name? What would Primarch be called?
Oh, I don't know. Hang on, I'm just thinking the creamy thing, of course, because always the cream floats to the top. So that's their philosophy. Is they are the creamy hogs, like where you take enough, and then the cream will eventually float to the top and become a hog.
Yes.
There's two ways really. I don't know what Latin for pig is. Porcine, something or other, probably. So either that or you go for something very
Horus.
obvious. Yeah. It's
Porcidius.
like Maximus Baconus or something.
Yeah.
The last thing we wanted to do, because we like competitions here, so we thought maybe you could be the judge of some of the lore that we've made. We were going to just all pitch you a little bit of a lore or a game or some rules or something that we've all been making on our own time, and you pick whoever you think has got the best legs on it, basically.
20-second pitches.
Yeah, like a 20-second kind of elevator pitch.
Okay.
So Matt, do you want to take us away? I know you've got a good one.
Yeah, I'll. Okay. This is my Warp Rift game. The working title is Gav Thorpe in the Warp. It's a 24-inch square board. The emotional representations of the Primarchs. Battle it out. Different rules of physics apply. It's not you go, I go. It's all go at the same time. There's an umpire controlled by an app representing the Chaos Gods. The game board and terrain changes constantly. You as a player of Chaos or Good must complete particular tasks such as closing the Warp Rift. All the models will be in clear plastic. There is an electromagnetic dice tray with steel dice, and it's linked to the umpire to make the dice rolls randomly biased.
He's given this one a real lot of thought, Gav.
Every week we get this, Gav.
Eye contact. Yeah, cool.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah, I can see that.
Shall I go next, Stoney?
Yeah, you crack on.
Okay, so I want to take you back to 1998, and I want to expand the excellent game that was Gorka Morka. I think it was then. Remember tailing and chasing and racing and ramming and thruster bursters and T-bones and boarding actions? I want to make a new game called Mag Uruk Thrakart, and Nintendo will not sue us for stealing that name. You design your cart, you race it around the track, you blow each other up. maybe there could be heretics, white scars involved, maybe Eldar raiding parties, but design your cart, race it round a track, blow each other
That's
up.
good. Yeah.
Nice.
Like that, yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll round us off then. So picture the scene, Gav. Right. There's a cool ass red spaceship, a racing spaceship. Right. It's being driven by a big cool guy with a bald head, big muscles, and a vest. Yeah. It's only Warhammer 40,000 Fast and Furious. All right. The fans are gonna absolutely hate it, but Ice Cube is on board. We're gonna make £6 million each. That's the pitch.
Oh, straight up.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's just blowing you two guys away, I'm afraid, isn't it? Well, Welsh's idea is cool, but actually, there was a bunch of guys in the studio. There's Ali and Owen Branham, who used to be on the scenery team and works for Forge World now and stuff like that. They made Formula War. I don't know.
Wow.
They took a couple of games days.
Cool.
I don't know. Formula War, which was great, was a fantastic racing game, just based off all the Mocha buggies and stuff like that, which was cool.
Oh, that's cool.
I think there might be, conceptually, Matt, I love the idea of like the chaos and all the rest of it, stuff like that. But I think you only need a bit of a proof of technology before that one gets legs. However, we already have proof of concept for the 40K and the Furious, which is, obviously people will watch anything with that on anyway already. So it's just a go at it.
He's a maybe. He's a hard maybe.
He would probably love to be involved in a 40K title in some way, especially if we tell him it's, he can have his own spin-off franchise from it. So yeah, 40K and Furious. That's the one to go with.
Hey, I want a Lords of Law.
Or is it the Fast and the 40K? Which do we think? Fast and 40K?
It should be the Fast and the 40K. Really, it just it came out wrong in the 20 seconds.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, you can do two. Why? Have both? Fast and 40K.
Why not start at Fast and 30K? Give ourselves some breathing room.
10,000 years of development. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. The Riddick Heresy. There we go. Crossover-tastic.
Yeah. I wondered, Gav, if you had a magic bullet in 40K, who would you kill off?
Oh, all right. Who would I kill off? Doom Rider. Sorry, Jervis. It was. So again, it was a sensible idea. Oh, let's have a different kind of demon prince who's right there. Doom Rider, bang, you're gone.
I have a sneaky spoiler question that you probably won't reveal, even if you know. But Lee 2, the character in Dan Abnett's book, is he of the Second Legion? Is that what that means?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, that's not related to that. That's an in joke about the first original Space Marine 40K Metal Space Marine code. I can't remember what it was.
Right.
It's like L2 or something like that.
In the catalogue that used to come through the post?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was something like that. Yeah, so his name's derived from that. I can't remember exactly what it was, but somebody can dig that one out. That's an Easter egg, I suppose, for that.
Oh, wonderful.
Would you see this is a question I'd love to ask. Would you see a Fulgrim clone being loyal to the Emperor, or would they 40K?
Right, I see. When would you clone? Well, so they were like if we had two Fulgrims and raised them separately, kind of experiment.
Or if Bile was to birth one now, how would they be?
Yeah, well, if Bile made it, he'd do it.
Yeah.
I would say he would eventually turn on the Emperor.
Okay.
I think the and kind of that's the idea, I suppose, is like, although he was possessed, and so it's revealed that actually he was inherently corrupt or corrupt of spirit or whatever. So that was a means to the end, but I think his path would have taken him into corruption eventually. Maybe not quite the same way, but that quest for perfection and his personality would have made him susceptible to that, taking that shortcut of chaos in the end. But so
how important is
so then there'll be two of them because you've claimed him now.
Yeah, it'd be worse. Yeah.
How important is John Grammaticus going to turn out to be at the end of Thing Siege of Terror?
Well, you'll have to wait and see.
Okay.
I can't. More or less.
Brilliant.
I mean, it's one of those things because it's like, yeah, he obviously has a thing, but we don't want his thing to overshadow
Yeah.
other big stuff, if you see what I mean. So, and that's one of the things we've been wrestling with in the meetings and stuff, is making stuff meaningful, but also trying not, and like I say, I've said before, it's like the Heresy is about revelation and things aren't quite the way you thought they were, but also, but not totally eviscerating the background as it was and making it pointless or senseless. And so that's where we're at with that kind of the perpetuals and all that kind of stuff, is yes and no. It's like, so we've got really into a really good place for that, which we will have to wait and see. But yeah, it's been a bit of a razor's edge at times, especially over the last few weeks, trying to get that right, of like, they're significant, but they don't make anything else, they don't undervalue the existing background and what we know to be true, I suppose. Yeah.
Do you foresee a future where that kind of the history that goes with all that becomes its own series, like a kind of unification wars past of the Emperor series, or is that a no-go?
Well, there's certainly a no-go at the moment, and even, so the Great Crusade we can kind of obviously touch on in the fiction and things like that. And what we have to be careful, I think, like Heresy, and by extending back from the Heresy, is just about connected enough to 40K, the 40K aesthetic in its game and the miniatures and everything else, that it's worthwhile. But once you start getting into that, before that, unification, potentially, but the unification thing again is a whole separate kind of era in its own right, and it and without being too crude, the only thing that links it to the rest of 40K is the Custodians and the Emperor, really. Like, Thunder Warriors have got nothing to do with the 41st millennium. Nothing else around at that time in any way exists or has any real impact on what's around in the 41st millennium. Whereas at least the Space Marines, once you get the Space Marines Legions, Primarch Space Marines, there's that continuity. There's 10,000 years of all sorts of stuff changing and happening and things like that. But there's a thing that binds what's happening there with what people have in the background and their games in 40K and on the tabletop. So again, whereas actually, and it's cool. I mean, it would be an amazing to explore it in a certain way, carefully, again, not in such a way that will necessarily demolish myths or destroy what's appealing about it. Because that's the thing, it's like it's very much the two missing legions. It's appealing because you don't know anything about it. You've got a little hints and stuff, and you go, it's cool. You go, is it really cool? We don't know because we've not done it. And so therefore, the area unexplored, the grass is always greener. It's always going to be enticing because it's got this, we can actually, or is it just more of the same, actually? How many times can you spin out certain archetypes and ideas? But it is essentially a different setting from anything that comes later. There's the Emperor and the Custodians towards the end of it, but actually just the unification is very different from the Heresy, which of course is different. So I would be very surprised. In fact, I'm not going to say never, because I was once told that there'd never be Primarchs in 40K. so
it's much more likely they'll fill in the gap
never.
and go backwards. Much more likely to fill in the gap and go backwards.
Well, exactly. There's still 10,000 years.
Exactly.
There's loads of cool stuff. Even
now. Did the Gene Stealer cult limo ever make a comeback, do you reckon? Do you think that is there space for it?
Well, it would be, because I know Jez loves the idea. Jez has always wanted to make one. So I think,
there's hope. There's still hope.
It just
be
depends.
A better person. He's the best.
It just depends where and how, though. That's the thing. Because it's a really cool idea, but is it just not? Because I know, it's like, does it actually fit on a 40K battlefield, or is it somewhere else? Is it an idea that has to? It's like, problem is, it's cool, and it actually would really suit something like a Necromunda level game, and obviously. There's been tweaks there in terms of the background and certain hives and whatever else. But then a vehicle in that game is potentially very destabilizing. It doesn't suit the game. So it's a cool idea. And I know, it's like he's managed to get most of the stuff out of his sketchbooks into the range one way or another.
Fingers crossed on that one,
Is last question I'm going to ask, is Mephiston too sexy to have been Calistarius?
No.
Okay. Right.
Yeah,
he's got it going on under that Terminator armor. It was just a bulky.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, great. Yeah, well, that was it, guys. That was the interview with Gav Thorpe. What an amazingly nice man.
Oh yeah, good sport.
It's crazy. We were recording this second section a day later, and I'm still absolutely buzzing that he gave up his time to come and talk to three dweebs that have had a podcast for a year.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's not like we've got the biggest following or anything like that, and he took time out of his day just to come and have a chat with us, and that is, truly commendable.
Brilliant. Yeah, and really interesting points that he made, and I feel like I took something away from it more than just the fact that I was speaking to Gav Thorpe.
Yeah.
great.
Lots to talk about in the future, and hopefully we'll be able to get him on and explore a few of the bits that we just didn't have time for, and we hope you enjoyed it if you listened as well.
Tip of the iceberg, but yeah, thanks Gav if you're listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hopefully see you again. Cheers.